And okay, so thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I want to just take a second and introduce our speakers to you all. So first, Angela Cleri is a fifth-year material science and engineering PhD candidate and the president of the Science Policy Society, or SPS, at Penn State. She received her BS from the University of Florida in 2018. Her thesis work involves fabricating cadmium oxide thin films for engineering nanoscale structures that can squeeze light to length scales, orders of magnitude smaller than their wavelength, a fundamental goal of nanophotonics. She is passionate about science policy, science communication, and community building. Outside of work and SPS, she enjoys cooking, rock climbing, crafting, and gardening. And then we have Claire Rodman. She is a fifth-year PhD candidate in mechanical engineering and the Advocacy Committee Chair of the Science Policy Society at Penn State. She earned her BS from Boston University in biomedical engineering in 2018 and her MS from Penn State in mechanical engineering in 2020. She studies human locomotion using bipedal robotics methods and predictive modeling. Outside the lab, she cares about advocacy and outreach, and in her free time, she enjoys reading, crafting, and various outdoor activities. So thank you both for agreeing to present to us today. We're super excited to hear about the Science Policy Society. And with that, I will turn it over to you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Oops. Okay, can you see the slides? Okay, cool. Yeah, so thank you guys so much for having us. I guess Erica has already kind of done the introductions, but yeah, we are a student organization at Penn State called the Science Policy Society. And we are funded in part by the Clinical and Translational Science Institute. So we kind of wanted to come here today and talk to you a bit about what our group does. We'll also talk a bit about what science policy is and why we think everyone should care about it. So again, we've already kind of done the introductions, but yeah, this is a bit about Claire and I. I'm a fifth-year material science engineering grad student. My hometown is Fort Lauderdale, Florida. These are some of my hobbies here on the left, and here's some photos from rock climbing and from a vacation I took in Spain and Portugal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so like she said, I'm Claire, and I'm a fifth-year grad student in mechanical engineering from Corvallis, Oregon. And Angela and I have a lot of the same hobbies that we do together. So yeah.
Cool. So we'll just jump into it. So if you're not familiar with science policy, we usually say it can be broken into sort of two facets, science for policy and policy for science. So on the science for policy side, you can think of this as the research that we may do in the lab can be used to inform the decisions that our legislators make. And it's important to be effective at communicating our science, because if data is misinterpreted or maybe misused by those without technical backgrounds, that can have negative impacts on policy decisions.
Yeah, and so then on the flip side of the policy for science piece, I think a lot of us can probably say that we're funded by federal research dollars. And because of that, we are influenced by the policy landscape at a federal and state sometimes level as well. And we're definitely influenced by current events that affect this as well. So we believe that it's really important for scientists to be able to communicate their needs and advocate for their research interests at like government levels, both state and federal, to be able to achieve their research goals and conduct meaningful work. So these are some examples of some high-profile science policy issues that we've been interested in recently. So the first one is domestic semiconductor manufacturing. And so with the recent passage of the CHIPS Act, we're about to see a huge influx of federal dollars into semiconductor manufacturing and research, which has huge ramifications for that industry, but also for researchers in material science like Angela and her collaborators who are looking into this. And so this is one way that this current political and like policy landscape is really going to affect us as scientists and academics. Another example that I'm sure we're all intimately familiar with is the COVID-19 pandemic. And I mean, as a translational research interest as well, right? This is a huge deal for policy issues as well. So the whole process of getting research from like mRNA research in the lab to vaccines to getting those distributed and putting funding towards that to get collaborations going to see the time scale of that really like match what we need for our national priorities with health. That has been a huge policy issue that is very, very directly affecting scientists, that scientists are also really strongly influencing as well. And so then another one that we're interested in with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there are a lot of pieces of that legislation that are really important. And some of that is lowering drug prices, right? Which definitely affects the translational research community in some sense. But there's also a lot in that legislation about climate and transition to cleaner energy sources. And this definitely affects researchers who look into these things. And it also affects how we implement these, because a lot of these processes, even for cleaner energy sources, might have less sustainable aspects to them that we need to consider as well. So basically our organization is really focusing on communication, right? So we're really trying to bridge this gap between technical and non-technical audiences. And so we kind of focus on three main areas. We focus on educating our membership on current issues, both scientific and policy-oriented issues. And then we also do a lot of outreach. And so to do this, we're really developing our communication skills to communicate with the general public, who are maybe more like non-technical audiences in general, about a lot of the work that we do, both scientific and more policy things. And then we also feel very strongly about advocating for science-informed policy and for policy that benefits science, right? So communicating with legislators as well is another very important mission of ours.
So I put together I've been collecting data this year based on who's been attending our meetings and coming to our events. And so this is sort of a breakdown of the different departments and programs that our members are in. And so you can see we have a pretty diverse membership. So we bring in a lot of different perspectives, and this also, everybody from different areas has different policy priorities. I also wanted to highlight the funding sources that we have for this year. The Huck Institute of Life Sciences and Materials Research Institute, of course, the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, and the Rock Ethics Institute. At this point, we kind of wanted to dive into some of the things that we're able to do with this funding within our group. So probably our most popular outreach event is Science on Tap. And if you're not familiar with this, this is an event that we host once a month at a local bar or brewery. And we invite scientists usually from Penn State to speak about their research in a way that is very high level. It's supposed to be accessible for a general audience. And we try to invite members of the public to come in and interface with scientists. So we host these at Axman Brewery in Bellefonte. And we try to bring in a pretty broad range of topics. So some of the topics we've had before are anthropology of alcohol, gravitational waves, mushrooms in Pennsylvania, human sexuality, nanomaterials, and symmetry. And so we'll usually bring in 2 speakers that work on a related topic, but can talk about them from different perspectives. So we might have, a professor and a grad student, or maybe a professor and then somebody who works in industry, and such. Yeah, try to get some different perspectives. So actually, on that note, if anybody here has any suggestions for speakers or would like to be added to our listserv for Science on Tap, you can email us with the email below, or we'll also show this later on.
So another thing that we do pretty heavily is the advocacy committee works a lot on policy writing pieces. And so this kind of looks like memos or op-eds or policy briefs that we're submitting to policy-oriented or science policy-oriented journals, and then also public comments. And so just to briefly hit on the public comments, what we're doing for this is when a proposed rule or regulation is formed in response to legislation that's been passed for how this stuff is going to be enforced, they have to open these proposed rules up for a period of public comment where anyone can submit a comment saying what they think about the proposed regulation. And so we submit comments to this open call, kind of harnessing our scientific backgrounds to give our perspective on the enforcement of certain legislation. And the nice thing about this is that somebody somewhere has to read these. So even if it's a staffer, somebody somewhere is going to read what you say, and it's just like a way for us to engage in that process. But so we definitely spend more time working on journal articles. And so we submitted 2 pieces to the Journal of Science Policy and Governance recently. Angela, do you want to talk more about yours?
Yeah, so I worked on this first one here about critical minerals. So a group of us looked in, well, we basically wrote this about how recently the Biden administration has put in a lot of money towards the clean energy transition, and also a lot of money towards scaling up domestic semiconductor manufacturing. And so these efforts have been praised and we're excited about them, but we also want to consider where the minerals come from to scale up this manufacturing and where these materials will go after they're used. So basically, we're moving forward in this clean energy transition, but we want to make sure that the manufacturing side of it is also sustainable as well.
Yeah, and so then I submitted an op-ed with a group of members. And so we were specifically looking at the recent event of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy ending the 12-month publication embargo regarding making your work as a researcher publicly accessible after a 12-month period if you're federally funded. So this is kind of initiating a transition into like federally funded research being available as soon as it is like publishable, basically. And so I think this transition is going to take place over the next 2 years, potentially. I want to say the deadline for getting this transition like fully enforced is 2025. But so this kind of raises a lot of questions about how this is going to be enforced, right? Because these funding agencies at the federal level will be, enforcing this with researchers. And our concern is that this would place a lot of the burden of having researchers publish open access or deal with copyright infringement issues with journals. It's placing a lot of that burden on the researchers themselves. And so we were kind of looking at the complexity of this issue and looking at all of the different stakeholders involved, like universities, funding agencies, researchers, like academic publishers, and then also the general public, because we feel that we have a responsibility as federally funded scientists for the public to be able to access the things that we work on. Yeah, so these are some examples of pieces that we've worked on. And we like to stay on top of current issues so that we can keep submitting pieces as things arise.
I also wanted to add, because I see there's a question in the chat about whether we connect with experts at Penn State. And so the public, so we do sometimes if we can find someone that is willing to talk to us. But the public comment here about Pennsylvania public school education standards, I think it was last year, the Department of Education in Pennsylvania, I believe they released their updated science education standards, and it was updated for the first time in, I think, 30 years. And we went through all the new standards and commented on what we liked or didn't like about it. And one person that we did connect with was a professor in the Department of, I guess, was it the Education Department, I think, at Penn State, who was part of the steering committee that wrote these new standards. And so we spoke with him and learned more about how these standards were put together and what they actually mean for the future of science education in Pennsylvania. So another thing that we participate in is public engagement. So we have a, or in the past, we have had a public engagement committee, and they sort of put together, I guess, content, you might call it, on our social media platforms and our website. And they're basically aimed at just educating our audience on a specific issue. The examples we have here are understanding climate change, big tech reform, and understanding the Electoral College. And actually the big tech reform one we did, we kind of went a little deeper into. We maybe Cleri, if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this largely because it seems like, you know, when we were starting this issue, there were a lot of current events related to lawsuits surrounding antitrust enforcement. And then there was a lot of, you know, hot button issues related to data privacy, and broadband access is something that affects a lot of Pennsylvanians particularly. And so when we were looking into this issue, we were seeing that, you know, a lot of the legislation surrounding these issues are from like the late 90s. Like a lot of this stuff is like pretty old and hasn't really kept up with the rate of tech advancement. So we really don't currently have a lot of effective ways to enforce, you know, your constitutional rights in this digital age in a really effective way. And so we put together a website where we kind of talked about some of the issues surrounding these three specific facets of this problem. And we also co-hosted a panel discussion about this with the Law, Policy, and Engineering Initiative, just to kind of highlight some of these issues and get expert perspectives on that as well. So.
Another big thing that we do is we try to occasionally bring in guest speakers and also have people come in to host workshops. So for instance, a few years ago, we brought in Gina McCarthy, who was the former EPA administrator under President Obama, and she came in and gave a speech about I guess, her outlook on the future of climate policy. We also had Erin Heath from the AAAS, that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. AAAS will send in representatives to host workshops. And so this one was a writing workshop, I think, on how to write a good policy memo. And so we've brought in people to do these types of workshops several times. And these workshops I think each workshop costs about $4,000. So this is something that a lot of our money goes to develop our professional skills. We've also done an LGBTQ+ in STEM panel where we brought in a lot of speakers from both within Pennsylvania and outside to give this panel, and that was a really neat event as well. Another big thing that we've been trying to do this year is to try to better educate our own members. And so to do this, we've been really trying to facilitate conversations within our group. One thing that we've started doing this year is this, what we call Science Policy Roundtable. And so at the end of each of our general meetings, I will pose sort of an open-ended question that's relevant to current events. Some of the examples are, is competitiveness required for tech and innovation? What are the shortcomings of the clean energy transition plans? And is science accessibility important? And if so, why? And so our general meetings usually have between 20 and 40 people, and it's a nice way to get the room talking to each other and bringing in different perspectives about maybe an issue that doesn't have a clear answer. We also have a committee called Science Insider, and this is sort of a journal club style group. And it's just a group of students that get together that might be interested in learning about science outside of their own area, or maybe discussing sort of controversial science topics. Some of the topics that are proposed for this year are the role of artificial intelligence in science, the origins of the opioid epidemic. We've done stem cell research in the past, and I think next week we're having one on the efficacy of STEM outreach. So who benefits from STEM outreach? Are people actually benefiting, and how can we measure this and use this to improve our outreach efforts in the future? And we also have a podcast. It's called SciPol Connect. And these are, I think, roughly 20-minute episodes where we will feature an interview with a science policy professional. So one of us will interview somebody that we're connected with who has a career in science policy, or maybe a career tangential to science policy. And we put these together in little 20-minute episodes. We only have a few episodes out so far, but we have one on someone who works in ocean policy. We have an episode with the person I mentioned before who works on the science education standards in Pennsylvania. And we also have somebody who works as the director of communications at a national lab, which was interesting because it's not really a traditional career path. You know, it's somebody who went, who focused their career on becoming to going into academia, and then sort of transition to this communications position, but they're still able to use their expertise as scientists in this position. And another big event that we do each year is we go to Washington, D.C. So we go to the nation's capital, and this is a fully funded trip that we put together for a group of maybe 5 to 10 of our most active members. And we set everything up ourselves. We schedule our own meetings with whoever will talk to us, really. So it's usually, we'll set up meetings with legislators or their staff. We'll set up meetings with science policy nonprofits, for example, the Union of Concerned Scientists, or AAAS. We've also met with professional societies. Last time we met with the Materials Research Society and the American Society for Mechanical Engineering. And we also have met with government agencies, such as the Office of Naval Research. So we'll really just try to set up meetings with whoever is relevant to the members that are going. And this trip is really beneficial for us, both in terms of information gathering and networking, and also it gives us real experience discussing our research with non-technical audiences and advocating for our research. I also, these are some of the recent events that we've done in the past year or so. Again, in terms of connecting with experts at Penn State, we've been connected with Amanda Winterstein, who is the VP for Federal Relations at Penn State. So she's sort of like a lobbyist for Penn State, and she has a lot of experience advocating for science that's done at the university level. And so we have met with her a few times, and we actually try to meet with her about once a semester to sort of get an update on what are the big things going on on Capitol Hill, and what are the things that we should be advocating for. We've also done a tour of a regenerative farm here in State College. This was a really neat event. It was all about learning about regenerative agriculture. We had a movie screening. There was food and drinks, and it was, and a tour, of course, as well. We also have social events. We did a group painting event. We're also going to have a happy hour tomorrow. And then I've mentioned we've done writing workshops, and we had a Q&A panel with NOAA, I think it was National Oceanic Administration or something. And we met with a panel of speakers from NOAA. And we also had an intern from the Union of Concerned Scientists talk about her internship. I guess this is one of the last slides, but we wanted to give everyone an idea of how you can get involved in science policy, whether you're a faculty or student or staff. I think the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things you can do, is to just stay informed. So keep up to date on the issues, on the science policy issues in your research area at the local, state, and federal levels. And if you're unsure how to keep up to date, a really good way is to look into what your academic professional societies are advocating for. So I put together a list of some academic professional societies that might be relevant to you or to some of our membership. And all of the ones on this list have some kind of advocacy component. You might even be able to go to their website, and they might even have pre-written emails that you can send to your representatives based on issues that people in your field are advocating for. So that's a really good way to find out about the issues. And once you find out about the issues, you can, of course, advocate for your research. You can send letters to Congress, as I mentioned. You can also do your own congressional visit days and try to network with your legislators. I guess I made this slide yesterday. Election day was yesterday, but another, of course, big way to advocate is to exercise your right to vote. So please do that whenever you can. And so I guess the thing we want to leave you with is asking, what are the big science policy issues in your field? We're funded by the CCSI, and we want to advocate for issues that you care about. And so we'd love to connect with you guys further. You can check out our website or any of our social media. You can also send us an email. If you want to join our listserv, you can do so by scanning this QR code. But yeah, that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you both so much. I do want to open it up to some questions, and I thought we would start by just, there is a question that was dropped in chat from Dee. So related to your public comments to legislation, do you work with other experts at Penn State or offices to inform or collaborate on those?
Yeah, so I sort of tried to touch on this earlier, but yeah, we've met with, we meet with experts when we can. We've met with the VP for Federal Relations at Penn State to learn about some issues that we might need to be advocating for, as well as in our public comment regarding the K through 12 science education standards in Pennsylvania. We met with somebody who actually worked on the steering committee to write those standards.
I think we typically also gravitate towards public comments that are related to scientific issues of our membership. So there are often times where we'll have grad students who kind of are experts in this area, but there definitely are times where there are issues that we care about where we are not the experts, and that's really where we definitely try to seek out other opinions as well.
Thank you. Other questions? Please feel free to unmute or drop a question in chat.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your talk with us today. I had a question in terms of student membership and partnerships across Penn State. Do you also work with individuals in the social sciences, such as psychology or communication science, to look at policy reform around issues of health, identity, and other issues that are in the similar social science realm?
Yeah, so that's something that we are definitely interested in. We recently had conversations with some students in the master's program for public policy to try to get more of the policy side of things, because, you know, we have strong scientific backgrounds, they have strong policy backgrounds. If we can kind of facilitate some knowledge transfer, we think that would be very helpful. We have no restrictions on what your discipline needs to be. You do not need to have like a science degree to be a member. And so we welcome everyone and we love diverse perspectives. I think it's definitely easier to recruit from the disciplines that we are in. But that is definitely something that we're interested in expanding as well, because we feel like those perspectives matter a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, that might be it then.
I have a question. What are some of your future plans or goals for the Science Policy Society? Where do you see it going? How do you want to grow? When you move on from Penn State, what are the plans to see it continue?
That's, I don't know, it's tough. I mean, I guess currently we're just really trying to expand our membership because it kind of declined a bit during the pandemic since we couldn't have in-person events. And so right now we have honestly a pretty big membership. We have probably, you know, 20 to 50 people coming out to meetings and events. Moving forward, I mean, I think we're always trying to build our network of like people we know in science policy. Right now, we're currently organizing a symposium for the spring, the Science Policy Symposium. And I think that is going to be big for what Claire was talking about, where we're trying to bridge both technical and non-technical people in our membership. We're trying to get more people on the policy side, since right now, you know, as Claire was mentioning, you know, we have a lot of expertise in STEM areas, but I think a big way that we can build is by getting more expertise on the policy side.
Yeah, I think we also try to partner with different like departments and institutes for specific events. So I think, like I mentioned earlier, we have partnered with the Law Policy and Engineering Initiative. And I think like we are a student organization that supplements their curriculum and their faculty fairly well. And so I think engaging with those students who are very directly interested in this interface, I think is a very strong direction for us to go in the future, and potentially trying to engage more undergrads. That's not really an area where we've seen high engagement in the past. We do also have some plans in the works for the spring that will hopefully continue related to outreach for K-12 audiences that are kind of taking advantage of this community interfacing infrastructure already established through the public library or like the Bellefonte Youth Center. And so those are some areas where we're trying to kind of engage with the community further than we already do. Because that is something that is a priority of us, and we want that to stay moving forward.
This is Dee. Do you all have you done any interactions with the group out of HHD called Evidence to Impact? Do you know them?
No.
I don't think so.
Max
That's-
Crowley, who's a professor in HHD and Health and Human Development. There's a center there. It's actually, well, it's really sits under the Social Science Research Institute. I don't know if you know them, but Evidence to Impact is a highly funded, well-organized group. Now, this is, primarily faculty, but I think some postdocs, but it might be worth reaching out to them. They've been around a while. They're pretty well connected to both state and national policy groups, and have provided, like you've done, not only comments, but they do a lot of policy, what do I want to say, papers that are at request of policy groups. So it might be interesting for you to reach out to them. As I say, the guy who's in the lead is Max Crowley, Crowley. Great guy, very interesting fellow. And he has a project manager. I've lost track a little bit, but I'm sure if you connect with them, that might be an interesting avenue for you, to see what they're up to, for them to know about you, because probably they don't know about you as well. And then there's a group within the Office of the Senior Vice President for Research that is actually, this is their job, is to interact with health policy people. Do you know them?
I don't believe so. I mean, I don't believe so.
Okay.
actually.
I mean, it's not a criticism. It's just saying, here's some more connections for you.
No, I really appreciate
we
it.
appreciate that. Yeah.
They're a standing office at Penn State, and they provide consultations to researchers, who think that they have a need to connect to policy, or they have, some of their research they feel is very policy relevant, or, whatever. They can go to that office, and they're also a conduit. So that might be an interesting place for you to interface. And then one last, I will say, is our faculty person, who is, well, I say part of our CTSI faculty, Charlene Husan, Hsuan. She's in health policy administration, and she does some really interesting research in terms of the effects of health policy and unintended consequences. But if you don't know her, she's really dynamite. She's doing interesting research. She might be a good, speaker for you, that kind of thing. So don't hesitate to reach out. You can say we recommended her if you want. But she's great. And she does quite a bit of this kind of thing, of interacting. And she's got a couple of grad students, I think, now working for her, maybe a postdoc. I can't remember, who might be interested in what you're up to.
Yeah, we really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure.
That all sounds right up our alley.
Yeah, I love what you guys do. I mean, I remember what some of the early events, we were downtown. I don't even know that you all were involved at that time, but hanging out with some community folks talking about science policy was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
May I ask a follow-up question based on this conversation? I was really interested in looking at the makeup of the members and how diverse it is across the different sciences, and learning more about the Science Policy Roundtable and the Science Insider groups that you have. And I was curious if any of those activities or connections that are formed lead to research collaborations and interdisciplinary work that stems from the opportunities that you've provided.
Yeah. So I know we've definitely had collaborations like within the science policy realm. Like we definitely have people who are kind of like, oh, maybe you have this interesting like agriculture perspective, and this other person has like the food science perspective, and they kind of get together and write a policy memo related to food and agriculture potentially. So we definitely see collaborations like that, where we're kind of bringing together different perspectives on the same issue. I'm not totally sure about collaborations outside of policy. Like, I'm not totally sure if we've seen collaborations with like research in the lab, but I don't know, Angela, if you have more.
Yeah, not that I know of at least, but I do know sometimes at Science on Tap, professor, if a professor in a certain department's giving a talk, other professors in that department might show up, and I know that they'll all start mingling after. And so I don't know really what that leads to, but I'm sure there's some kind of, I don't know if it's like actually research collaboration or at least like this conversation.
Yeah, that sounds super valuable. Oh, sorry, Claire.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I personally really like the roundtables and the Science Insider conversations, because there are definitely times where it's like, I do computational research at the moment. So I'm just on my computer all day. And so sometimes we'll have these conversations, and someone who's like, doing lab work, or maybe someone who has field work and they're engaging with the communities, in the place that they do field work, they have insight into some of the conversations that we're having that just like don't even occur to me, because my experience day to day is just so different when it comes to like actually conducting science. And so I find those really, really valuable. And so even if I don't end up collaborating with people like on research, it definitely does affect how I approach science and conducting research. And it does like influence how I think about what I do. So.
Yeah, that sounds really vital to just understanding different perspectives. That's something I've been trying to create kind of independently, is to like try to meet people from different departments, but I find it can be challenging without a structure in place to have those conversations. So I'm very grateful for learning about this opportunity today.
Yeah.
All right, maybe we should wrap it up then.
Yeah, so if there's no other questions, I just want to thank you both for your time and for sharing more about this. I hope that folks who are joining us or watching the recording do at the very least join your listserv so that they're aware of all the events that are happening. And I did just want to make a quick plug for next month's translational science seminar. It'll be on December 8th from 12 to 1 p.m. Covering translational research training opportunities for students. So in this presentation, or in this seminar, we'll present an overview of our training programs within CTSI for graduate and medical students to acquire the translational research skills and knowledge needed to work across disciplinary boundaries, advance findings from the lab into clinical settings and communities, and innovate solutions to improve human health. So Angela and Claire, thank you again so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.